All right, everyone, Ken is not in this evening. I don't know if he's gonna come online, but Sean's gonna go ahead and start the meeting.
So we'll call the meeting to order. So roll call.
We're all here.
Freilinger here. And who do we have online?
Maxfield here.
Okay. I thought you said Sue was online.
Yes, good evening. Walt here.
No Sue yet. Okay. Well, we'll get started. Maybe she'll log in. All right, so first we'll open it to public comment. Robert, I think I saw that you had signed.
Yeah, thank you. Hang on a second while I get myself together here. I'm mindful of Chairman Moore.
Sue said she's not seeing a Zoom link.
On the website, I can email it to her.
Oh, she says she found it.
Okay.
Oh, good.
If you'll wait a second, she'll probably be on.
If you wanna start, Robert, then I can just go ahead
Okay,
and,
yeah, so
announce when she comes
anyway,
online.
like, as I attended the last city council meeting, sorry, I've been on the road for an hour and 45 minutes to get here. As I attended the last city council meeting, when the resolution for the lighting, dark sky lighting or whatever the lighting resolution came up for a vote after numerous discussions and numerous people's inputs and numerous yays and one nay, because the person didn't believe there was any issue with lighting and waterfowl and ducks and geese and anyway. So, but anyway, when the vote came to fruition, it was not a complete resolution as a yay. There was one nay from the mayor, and obviously she wasn't at liberty to say why, but I'm going to definitely ask her at the next city council meeting. I know how important this resolution was and how hard you guys worked on it for months. And based on everybody's input, I thought it was a good starting point. And that is partly what I said during the council meeting. So I can't tell you why the mayor voted nay, but in any case she did. And so we will try, or the resolution will come up for a vote next month. Whether or not it will pass, I haven't the slightest idea. I would assume so based on the previous vote, but people can always change their minds. So, and I just wanted to say you guys did a heck of a job. You and Mr. Walt Wendelowski, who did most of the paperwork. So thank you, Walt, for what you did for the lighting resolution. It's much appreciated. And I'm done.
Thank you.
Show that Sue has now joined us virtually.
Hello, Sue.
All right. So going down the agenda, we have no presentations, no public hearing. So we are moving straight on to other business. So Walt, I guess I will hand it off to you. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Thank you. Let's do a little rewind here why we're doing this. We have two titles that effectively control planning in the city. One is Title 10, which is all the zoning information, and one is Title 11, which has to do with land divisions. The Planning Commission thought it'd be a good idea if we just combine it and create effectively one development code that covers everything with regard to land use. This made sense. I took the core of Title 11 and basically reorganized it into a new chapter, which is Chapter 10-136. And we've gone through the basics. I think we're up to subdivisions now. A couple of things to consider here tonight. I looked at this again. It's been a little while since I've gone through it with a fine-tooth comb. I obviously don't need it for the top of my head, but it's been a little while since I've looked at this in detail. And my first thought after starting off with the subdivision section is that I'd like to get rid of all the information or references in this section to plan unit developments. And there's a reason for that. We have a plan unit development chapter, chapter 10.124. That particular chapter goes through pretty excruciating detail in terms of how to process this. And it's kind of interesting. Title 11 basically redid, or in some cases modified and altered, what is required in Title 10, which is one of the reasons we want to combine these. I want to eliminate everything under section 136.0, it should be 050, but under that section where it says subdivisions, which is on page 6 of your memo there, I'd like to eliminate all references to plan unit developments and redo a section, add a new section after this that basically ties chapter 10.124 to the procedures in 10.136. It won't take a long time. I just think it makes a little more sense. So before we dive into the subdivision section, I want you to know that up front, if it says plan unit development, I'm crossing it off. Or if it says anything else other than subdivision, this section is going to be for subdivisions only. So I just want to start off by noting that, and I think it's going to make a lot more sense when we go back and look at the second draft. And I think it's also going to be a lot cleaner and easier to understand for the public than mixing subdivision and plan unit developments under one heading. So I hope that's acceptable to the Planning Commission. I think there's a logic in it. And I just want to let you know that after looking at it, I had a number of issues with the way this section is currently put together under Title 11, but also revamped for this document here. So before I proceed, are there any questions with what my intent or plans are with regard to this section under subdivisions?
Could you provide a little explanation of what the planned unit development is versus a subdivision?
Okay, very good point. In fact, that's a good question. I think people mix the two up at times. A subdivision is a straightforward dividing of property that you're creating 4 or more lots within a calendar year. If you're creating only 3 pieces of property, those are parcels, and that's a partition. So with the subdivision, you're creating 4 or more lots. I think a classic example of a subdivision is the one that the commission approved last year. The one that's next to the park. The name escapes me right now, but it was 57 lots. That's a subdivision. A plan unit development is a little bit different animal. With a plan unit development, you are allowed to reduce lot sizes. You can have narrower streets. You have a lot more open space, and it's usually shared. You have the potential to mix, say, single family and multifamily uses. You have not only open space, but you could have shared facilities. For example, a plan unit development may have a community center or a indoor pool, or maybe tennis courts, things that only members of the planned unit development have access to, or probably guests. And it is designed to be a lot more flexible. You generally see clustering of homes and a lot more open space, and you take care of the natural environment. I don't think Yamhill or a lot of cities in the Willamette Valley, since generally flat, not a lot of hills, are probably conducive to a PUD. It's a way of putting houses on the ground and getting around some difficult, for example, terrain issues. And that's basically the difference. You're granted a lot more flexibility. The downside is, though, with the planned unit development, expectations by the city are far higher. An applicant has to put in they have to put in a complete landscaping plan for the entire project. They have to look at housing design. They have to look at other architectural features. If there's any shared amenities, again, the indoor pool or tennis court, they need to provide information on operations, how they're run, times they will be operated, who's in charge. I mean, there's a lot more involved. And on top of that, there's a lot stricter legal formation. You can get approval, build out, record a plat for a subdivision, and just start selling lots. With a planned unit development, there's a higher standard of maintenance, higher standard to control shared facilities, and it can get quite pricey. So I just wanted, because they are so different, and I saw the way they handled it in Title 11, and I basically took that format. I'm now looking at it, I think, with probably my third look. I just like to separate those two out, because those are two completely different animals. They're going to get you the same thing. They're going to get housing development, but how they get there is completely different. And the standards for approval and the standards for development are completely different. Hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Shall I
Any
proceed?
questions about that with anybody? No. Okay.
No? Okay. Okay, thank you. Well, I guess the easiest thing to do is start asking if you have any questions. This is a new section, which is subdivisions, and it basically more or less follows the format that we currently have. The focus here, again, is on subdivisions, and I'm going to just reemphasize that 2 or 3 more times here. I will be eliminating all references to PUD, but the first part is submittal requirements. Recalling the other subdivision, there's a lot that they had to submit. They had to submit engineering plans, you need topographic information, etc. It's a very detailed process, and it serves 2 purposes. It helps the planning commission in terms of making their decision, but it also provides background information for the Public Works Department and city engineer to determine whether or not the project can be serviced. And that's one of the key things here. Subdivisions are really simple. Either the lots are the right size or they're not, and the streets are the right size or they're not. It's pretty straightforward. The devil is in the details for sewer, water, storm drainage, and say connectivity of the street system. So again, this is pretty straightforward stuff, but this is what we have in the current zone. Title 11. I didn't make maybe a couple of grammatical changes, but that's pretty straightforward. Following that, under item 3 is supplemental information for planned unit developments. Again, all of that's going to be taken out. I'm going to put that in a new section for the reasons I've noted. Under item B are the review procedures. And this is pretty straightforward. These are reviewed by the Planning Commission under Chapter 10-128. It's pretty clear how we do it. We notify adjacent owners, etc. So that's pretty straightforward. One major change I did make was on time limits. The current process is 1 year. I changed it to 2 years. And you could see what happened with the prior subdivision. They had to come back to the Planning Commission to get reapproval because their 1 year lapsed before they could record the plat. My experience is when it comes to subdivisions, it takes about 2 years to get the plat recorded. You go through your approvals, you have your preliminary engineering, you start turning the soil and putting in the infrastructure. You then have your inspections to make sure everything is fine, any final bonding that needs to be done, then you can record the plat. There's always something that comes up to slow things down. 1 year was a tremendously short timeline. I changed it to 2 years, and I think that does make sense. Time extensions are allowed by the Planning Commission. You can add 1 extra year. They have to come back for your review. And you can they have 2 chances to, they can get a 1 year extension and a second 1 year extension. But after that, they have to reapply from the start. Chances are we're going to modify some of our requirements, if you will, and we want to bring them up to speed. On the bottom of page 7 is the subdivision review criteria. And if you look at it, it's really simple. They have to meet the dimension standards of the underlying zone, pretty straightforward. You have to have sufficient sewer, water, and storm plans in place. And that's Public Works and Civil Engineering through the city engineer. And also we have certain development standards they have to meet. If you will, these are design standards. And so as long as they meet those 3, it's, understand subdivisions are approved unless they can't meet these things. These are outright permitted activities. So those are pretty straightforward. And usually when I put together a staff report, the first item will be, okay, here's the zone, here's the minimum lot sizes, either the lots meet them or they don't. Under the next item under B, are there adequate facilities? I always include comments from city engineer and public works and whether or not they meet that. And then finally, the third item is the design standards. And so we previously reviewed some of the basic design standards at our May meeting. And now there are some additional standards that need to be met. And this is on the top of page 8. And some of these apply and some of these don't apply. And before I get started, are there any questions so far? I just want to make sure I'm not drowning anyone out here.
So I had one question under submittal requirements.
Okay.
So item 2A2Q. So with the current subdivision, the latest one, we had some conversation about slopes and stuff on adjacent lots.
Uh-huh.
And so it mentions the contour lines, 2-foot intervals, if 10% slope or less, 5-foot intervals. Is there anywhere in here that indicates that you need to show those contour lines relative to adjacent lots?
The short answer is no. That can be changed. I think that's a good idea because if you have topographical information for your property, you certainly have it for the adjacent properties. These are basically cut and paste off of a variety of sources. So I mean, no one goes out there and surveys each contour. This information is readily available. So that should not be a problem, and I can definitely make that change. Okay? All right. Okay, top of page 8, we're looking at other standards. Again, not everything here applies. Not all subdivisions will have a number of blocks. Again, look at the last subdivision. It was basically a street that went there. I think there was a block area. It just, not everything applied here. So, you have to use a little common sense when you lay these out, as long as, and the main thing you're looking at is circulation. Can people get through, no, to, through, and out of the subdivision? And that is not only just vehicles, but pedestrians and bicyclists. And we have to make sure that we can account for that. And some of the things we look at, for example, you want to limit the block sizes. If they're too large, you want to have connections in between so people can walk from one block to the next. You want to make sure traffic circulates, and again, that's noted at the beginning. And you need to make connections to what are called activity centers. For example, the last subdivision we looked at was next to an activity center, which was Beulah Park. And so they want to make sure there was some connection there, whether it's a highway or roadway, a bicycle path, something to make those connections. The next item, your streets have to comply with the width requirements. We have a standard right-of-way width. The improvement in between is basically a civil engineering matter, but we have a standard right-of-way width that we have to follow. We want to avoid stub-end streets, but if there's the potential for developing adjacent property, you stub out the street. In fact, I think the last subdivision did have that feature where it extended a stubbed out street. The other thing is like access ways. You want to make sure that people can get from one street to the next. And if you look at the little diagram under figure 2, talks about connectivity, you see there's a little access way at the end of the cul-de-sac so they can get to the, say, the next street over. And also below that, the stub street can be extended further to the east. So again, you want to make sure that there are connections. I think one thing you need to know for Yamhill, you have basically a very good grid system, and that's extremely smart and efficient way of moving people around town and also moving traffic around town. So you're very fortunate that you don't have these, oh, what did someone describe it? It's sort of like worms, you know, all these streets that constantly curve and curve, and you really don't know where you are. It's very clear how the streets are laid out in town. And I think that's to your advantage. With regard to access ways, we have certain standards of 15-foot width, 12 feet of paving. There's a little note here on lighting, and that follows through with what was mentioned at the beginning, part of our lighting material. And then finally, collectors and arterials. If you don't have a local street making a connection to a collector or arterial for a certain distance, you have to have some sort of walkway. Again, what you want to avoid, in fact, it was kind of interesting. Someone pointed out there was a huge subdivision in Florida, must have been like over 1,000 homes, but the streets were not laid out in a grid pattern and basically snaked around. And someone made a measurement that to go from your backyard to the neighbor's backyard, which was basically behind your house, you had to walk over a mile because the streets were not connected. There were no access ways, which is kind of crazy to think about. But, you know, again, this is what the program works with. Under item D, we're looking at phased development. Development can be phased. I think it's important to note that under state law, the maximum phasing time period is 10 years. So I can't imagine most subdivisions, I think we're likely to see would be 1 or 2 phases and done in a very short time. And there's some criteria to look at phasing. So if anything, understand these would be likely placed as conditions of approval, especially if the applicant goes, I'm doing a 100-lot subdivision, I'm going to put it into 2 phases. Then we would go ahead and make conditions to that decision to make sure it's done that way. Under E, the PUD review criteria, again, I'm going to be changing that. And finally, the form of the final subdivision plat. The bottom line is the form of the final subdivision plat is really controlled by the Yamhill County Surveyor. They follow ORS 92, which is the state law that sets the standards for all the certifications, monumenting, etc. So this simply references that particular requirement. Also note, sometimes these organizations, subdivisions, have a homeowners association. These have to be reviewed by the city attorney before they're put in place because they want to make sure they're not violating our local codes. We don't have a paint requirement, for example, a color requirement. A homeowner association can go ahead and have that, but the association cannot go ahead and have rules that allow smaller lots or bigger homes or changes to setbacks. So that's part of the reason the attorney looks at that. So before I go any further, are there any questions on what we have? Most of it's pretty straightforward, but yes, sir.
So under the collectors and arterial connections,
Yeah.
is there anything in there that would help? Okay, well, I'll probably describe this better with a situation.
Okay, go ahead.
The Elm Street subdivision, Elm Street, where Elm Street comes into 240.
Yeah,
It's a very poor intersection.
right.
The sight distance is horrible. People park really close to that intersection and you can't, if you have a big truck, it's hard to get in and out of there.
Uh-huh.
But that's several blocks away from the subdivision. But the impact of that subdivision is to cause some congestion at that point and some potential traffic hazard there because of the increased traffic. So I'm just wondering, is there anything in this that would address that?
Not
It almost
necessarily.
feels like that Elm Street should have been improved up to 240.
I would have to say the short answer again is no on this. However, part of what you're doing in a subdivision, we can require what's called a traffic impact analysis. And so they would go ahead and make some notations in terms of, or studies on the traffic impact, and they would show that to the planning commission. A traffic impact study may have been able to go ahead and identify that as a potential problem, and that might have been addressed through the hearing process. That is a little bit unusual situation, but I think requiring a impact analysis, if for no other reason, just to say, what's the impact of the new subdivision on the local street system? That would be a way we would go. And in fact, you raise a very good point. And let me make a notation of that. On the application process, going back to submittals, I think another submittal, if requested by the city, a traffic impact analysis that might have addressed your concerns. Let me put a big circle around that. I think that's a very good way of going. No, good point. Okay. Moving on. The next item, G, improvements in bonding are basically right out of the code. I've looked at other requirements and other codes. This is pretty much boilerplate stuff. It just says, they have to bond for the improvements. In fact, again, the last subdivision, one of the reasons it was held up after a year was finishing up the bonding requirements. And so that's part of the issue. And again, the liability falls that if they don't complete the requirements, their bonding, the city can take out the bond. Again, that's pretty much boilerplate. With regard to improvements, again, our focus is on subdivisions. If they're along a frontage, they have to do a half-street improvement. That's standard. And a half-street improvement is not just half a street, it's really more of 2/3 or 3/4 of a street. They basically pave, they do the curbing, the sidewalk on the subdivision side, they do a half street for the improvement, and always pave a little over for a second travel lane. So those frontage improvements, along with sewer and water and storm, have to be done. All the project streets inside the subdivision have to be built to city approved engineering plans. The city has engineering specs, X amount of gravel, rock, so much of asphalt, so many lifts. Generally, we keep those out of land use because they can change rather quickly if need be. Putting them in a development code makes it difficult to amend. And so, again, that's something that I think the professionals who know that stuff work with. Monumenting, again, survey requirements, pretty straightforward. Sanitary, sewer, and storm drainage. Again, this is all part of the engineering plans that need to be submitted at the beginning. Again, going back to the submittal requirements, they have to provide that information up front. City engineer and public works look at that and make comments as needed to, put in a different pipe size or whatever to make sure it conforms to city requirements. I will say this, though, under most circumstances, developers don't go that far of laying out a project unless they spend time with Public Works and the city engineer to make sure that they have everything laid out correctly. So I've rarely seen a problem where the engineering plans are insufficient. So I'll just make that note.
So
Yeah.
section number 5 and number 6 deal with the sewer and the water system.
Uh-huh.
This is very focused on the impact to the design within the subdivision and connecting. Is there anything, given the controversial discussions around town around water and sewer,
Understand.
that would help us gather information about the impact in that regard?
Well, actually, both sewer and water requires them to show that the existing sanitary sewer lines are adjacent to or within the project. Okay, wait a minute here. Required the developer construct sewage lines of a size exceeding necessary or will be necessary to serve the entire area. In other words, we have a master sewer plan and a master water plan. And part of what's looked at with the engineer to look at the civil requirements is to go ahead and sort of raise the question, if we put this system in, what will the downstream impacts be? So in other words, if you're putting in 8-inch pipes and the pipe you're connecting to is only 2 inches, there might be some problems. Or, okay.
I'm more concerned about the impact once it gets back to the sewage plant and
Uh,
the water supply.
Well, I think there was a very good discussion. I recall about 2 years ago, the attorney made concerning, um, what was it? It was basically if you can't provide the facilities, what do you do? And that's where you go through, you stop building permits and you gotta make the changes necessary. So that's all part of the plan there. Um, all
I guess
that has to be looked at.
I'm just wanting to make sure that that's not in here. So is this not the appropriate place to have that conversation? I don't know.
Well, what I could do is add something to the effect that plans must be consistent with the adopted master plans.
Okay.
Okay, got it.
Let the record show that Ken Moore has joined us.
Okay. I will put that in on. Okay, I'll put that in on all those. Ken?
Hello.
Yes, before I proceed, I made some changes. I started off by making a significant change to the section on subdivisions. It unfortunately combines, and this is what we have currently in Title 11. And just to kind of make it simple, I just kind of transferred one from Title 11 to put it in this new Chapter 10-136. Unfortunately, I think it works at cross purposes on the planned unit development provisions that are in Chapter 10-124. And so all through that subdivision section, I am suggesting crossing out all references to planned unit developments. And it's my intent to create a separate section for planned unit developments that sort of mirrors the requirements in 10-124. As it stands now, the two are jumbled and I think can create confusion. And I just want to clarify that. Sometimes you look at it 2 or 3 times and the light bulb finally goes on. It just was a little confusing and I could see problems down the road unless we straighten that out. So there will be one section on subdivisions, and there will be another section on planned unit developments, and it will mirror what we have in 124. So that I'm hoping will clean things up a bit.
Great, that answers some of my questions, because I did notice they were kind of mingled in a way that, you're trying to talk about one, but you're talking about both, and
Exactly.
yeah.
And that's the way Title 11 currently reads. And so I just kept looking at it and I'm going, it's one thing when you write a staff report, it's another thing when you start looking at it a little bit more in depth. And I just kind of looked at that and just went, it's going to make a lot more sense, even if the section just says submittal requirements must comply with section 10.124 paren whatever. And we keep things consistent because there's a lot more requirements at the back end for a planned unit development than there is for a subdivision. So I just want to let you know up front, I'm going to be making that change on the second draft. So I don't know if you have other questions. We're up to the improvement requirements, but if you have anything else, now's a good time to chat about it, I guess.
Great, I apologize. I got out on my tractor and I forgot. That's all there is to it, and I apologize. Yeah, I'd like to back up to page 6.
Sure, go ahead.
2G. It says the approximate location. of existing streets, easements, or rights of way. Maybe that might lead to the city making concessions, be forced to make concessions that it would rather not, interpreting the word approximate. Can we just leave out the word approximate?
No problem.
That
No
makes
problem.
sense, and these are just my armchair, ideas that they don't have to, I'm not standing on these as like, this is, I know what I'm talking about, it's just a thought that came to mind. If you agree, then great. If you don't, I'm not pressuring anything here.
You know, Ken, I looked at this afternoon, and that's where I kind of had this idea of separating PUD and subdivision.
Yeah.
And I made a little note off to the side. I was going to mention it, but I'm sort of glad you brought this up. I take no issue with the changes. I find having, 10, 5 sets of eyes looking at this will make a better document. So I think that's a good idea. In fact, there were a couple of other recommendations previously, which I'm going to follow up on. And one included as part of application submittal, a traffic impact analysis.
Great. I had one more thing in G. Easements or rights of way adjacent to or within the subject property and existing improvements on the property and important features such as section and political boundaries. There's only 2 things there.
That would be fine. Actually, you don't need, yes, indeed. And that sounds good. Got it.
And I have the word congressional. It doesn't make any sense.
You have the word what?
Congressional. Why would I have that?
I have no clue.
That's the political,
You're really smart.
related to the political
No,
stuff.
you gotta read my mind. What was I thinking? Okay.
Oh, man. Okay.
Let's see.
I'm assuming political meaning like city, county.
City boundary, county boundary. Yeah, same thing.
Congressional boundaries. Why did I? Oh, political. Oh, I guess what political boundaries are you talking about? That's what I meant.
City limits.
Oh, okay.
That's a political boundary.
That's what every land use guy knows, person knows that when they see political boundaries, that means city limit. Okay.
City limits. You could even get it refined down to school district boundaries. And I'm sure up in the metro area, that's a factor.
If it's clear, congressional was a guess, is what do you mean? All right, there we go.
No, I don't need to know where you're voting. Okay, that's not important.
All right, very good. And then I know name, address, and maybe email in H. So we ask for an email. Is that kind of a thing now?
I don't think we need to ask that. That without a doubt, people put that in. It's also on the application form.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason to pop it in here.
What about naming rights within limits on streets and sections? I mean, who's to make it not be inappropriate? Is this somebody has that?
For what?
Naming rights of the subdivision, the home park, the PUD.
Well, ultimately, if it's going to be platted, the county surveyor has the final call. You cannot conflict with another subdivision name unless it's like, Ken's Estates, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. That's acceptable because they're right next to each other. Most of this has to do with 911. They don't want to have the same street, similar street addresses or subdivisions or nomenclature.
So the county will have final say on that.
Absolutely. The county, when the surveyor looks at it, in fact, a lot of this is taken care of not at the planning commission level, but actually at the pre-application level and the applicant's level, you know, they will check with the county on the name. They will do a lot of the homework before they actually submit. So when you see some that goes Ken subdivision, they've already had the name kind of checked out by the county.
Okay, thank you. 3B on page 7.
Okay, that I'm crossing off. That's part of the plan unit development stuff. I'm going to put in a separate section.
I didn't notice that, never mind. I just was, make the proposed uses of the property including sites, if any.
Yeah, more than one site, you can have facilities, parks, etc. That's going to be in a whole separate section and will likely reference chapter 10-124 a little bit more. That has a whole series of requirements that are rather lengthy, and I don't want to repeat it. Or as you said, I just didn't want to confuse the two with subdivision PUD. So I'm just going to create a 10-136-060 for
When you-
plain.
When you move it, I wonder if you want to make that, if any, if you want to make it criteria.
Actually, if you go a little further, there is a criteria,
Okay,
and I'm going to include all that under the PUD. I've taken my goal is to take, if it says PUD, take it out and put it in a new subsection. I just want to keep it separate.
okay, and then D as well, when you move it, all of D would you want to make those criteria? Sidewalks, streets, bikeways, lighting.
Actually, if you look at chapter 10-124, they have a whole series
Okay.
of things like landscaping plans, etc. And instead of repeating it verbatim, I'm just going to create a section that references it. So we have a section that talks about land divisions.
Great.
And like anything, I mean, for example, the subdivision, it talks about you got to meet minimum lot sizes. Well, you go back to the zone to check on lot sizes. And just same thing with the PUD. You go back to the PUD provisions to make sure you have the ducks in line, so to speak.
Are we still in planned, let's see, if I asked for us to look at C2, am I back into the plan development?
No, C2 is definitely for subdivision review criteria.
Right, so I'm looking at 2, and it says adequate public facilities and shall be available. I wonder, how does this system specify or determine what's adequate?
A letter or email from the city engineer and Public Works that says the layout complies with the city requirements and can be connected to the existing system with maybe certain improvements, and that the system has adequate capacity to take that in. That is a civil engineer call. And basically, I rely on the civil engineer and Public Works to say, we can serve this. And that's one of the standards, and it sort of gets the planning commission out of that debate. And so they're the ones, let me see, how do I put this? The civil engineer is the person with the stamp.
So maybe we want to put that in here, adequate public facilities as per city engineer?
We could do that. That probably adds some clarity.
Yeah, because I don't want to be in that question.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. Then in 3, the proposed layout shall comply with the general development standards in section 1036, and I have the word 30, and I have lots. 1036.
Well, actually, we did review that earlier.
1036:30.
10:36:30, standards for lots and parcels. And I have a bunch of notes in terms of,
Okay. I'm
yeah,
just reminding myself that that's what that is, that they
yes,
have to meet the development standards that are in this 30, and that's about the lots. Okay.
right. And, we've kind of, lots have to comply with those requirements, but then if you flip the page, there are design requirements that apply to the subdivision as a whole. Okay, so in other words, the lots have to meet the lot size requirements, etc. And if it's a flag lot, it has to be designed in a certain way. But then when you go to the next page, it talks about standards for the entire subdivision. And that includes things like blocks. That's not individual lots, but groups of lots, obviously. Connections, access ways, make sure the streets are the right size. You have traffic circulation, etc.
Great. Okay, in G there on page 9, the last sentence, it says preclude of the access placement. The access way placement may be modified or eliminated if natural features, adverse topography, prevent such a connection. Instead of
Or, well, preclude, prevent,
Okay, is that's what that means?
yes. I could put prevent. No, I think that's a good tweak.
Okay, and in D1, why 10 years? Just curious.
State
why
law.
it's the law. Well,
Yeah, state law. It was, the other thing, in fact, I'm glad you raised that, because I want to make sure you understood one of the, actually, we will get to, maybe we got to that. Oh, okay. Schedule. One thing I changed is that you have up to 2 years to get the plat recorded under the initial approval. 1 year is too short of a time. And Ken, you're very familiar with the problem we ran into that with the last subdivision. They were ready to record, but they were already past the 1 year thing because they were still working on some of the bonding requirements to wrap up the project. And it was kind of a shame because they had everything built and they were just doing the stuff at the end, if you will. And that's something that we have to take into account. 2 years seems to be more than reasonable. And I cannot recall any circumstance where we've made dramatic changes to a subdivision ordinance or a partition ordinance that would affect, extending it 1 extra year. 2 years, I think, is logical. And I think most engineers and everything, let's face it, you get approval in the fall, you're not going to be out constructing until spring or summer. You got to go through the bid process, and there's no way you're going to be done within 1 year.
all right, thank you. The sentence of G1, bonding, the subdivider shall file with the agreement a financial instrument. I think it just calls for a comma right after agreement to make it, I couldn't understand the sentence until I looked at it for a while.
Yeah, okay, made that note.
And then on page 11,
Oh, one other thing, as you came in, there was a, when it comes to surface drainage, sanitary sewer and water systems, to go ahead and reference the master plan, that the plans need to be consistent with the requirements of the city and the adopted master plans. Just to clarify, so there's no doubt.
oh, good. Good. Connection charges required in accordance with the city's adopted connection charges ordinance, and I imagine we have that, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, some of these bleed into some of the financial requirements. It's hard not to do that because it's really a check by City Hall, if you will, that they pay their bill to make the connection. So, but again, nothing comes back to the commission to approve unless everything's taken care of.
All right, I had a question about water line size, or line sizes, sewerage. H5,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Each five, hold on.
yeah, that bottom of 11.
Yeah,
The city may require that the developer construct sewage lines of a size exceeding that necessary to adequately service the development in question, where such facilities are or will be necessary to serve the entire area, like the next field that a housing
Right.
development's gonna go in.
correct.
To serve
However,
the-
there is a process for that. For example, I think they're only required to pay for up to a certain pipe size, and the city pays for the overage. So they install the pipe, the city pays the overage fee.
Okay, because my question was, what's the limit of what city can ask for? Well, if they're gonna ask for it, they're gonna pay for it, so that'll be self-limiting.
Yeah,
To keep it reasonable to
exactly.
the developer.
Exactly. So most water lines in a subdivision, say 8-inch, and if for some reason they need to put in a 12-inch to serve additional property further or wherever, the city pays the 4-inch overage.
Well, that's really interesting, isn't that amazing? All these things we don't know.
Believe me, it took a lot of years to figure this out.
Yeah. Oh, on the top of page 12, the third line, the beginning of the third line says his. I just thought we might change it to the developers.
Oh, okay, yeah. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I think that's good. Let me see, third line.
Beginning of the third line on page 12. It says his, referring to the contractor. I thought we should put in the contractor, or the developer rather.
Okay, okay,
Have I got a different page?
Oh, yeah, it's a little different.
yeah, you,
Okay, the
different.
city may also require the construction to take place as an assessment. Okay, I should just give you it's H5 near the end of the paragraph.
Okay, got it. So definitely his to contractor or whomever. Got it.
All right.
Nothing wrong with that.
Then in 6, 3/4 of the way down, however, the city will not expect the developer to pay for the extra cost of mains exceeding 8 inches in size. Okay, and that's
Yeah.
an example of what you just said.
Right.
The city pays, yeah. And my question was, does this mean the city pays? And you already told me. Okay.
Yes, we do.
Curb cuts and driveway installations, I'm in 10 now, 10A.
Mm-hmm.
Are not required of the developer at the time of development, but if installed, shall be according to city standards. That kind of left me wondering, when will they be installed?
Building permit. In other words, if you're going to cut the curb and put in a apron, you want to do it once. And so you never know where the house is going to be located. So that's why we defer sidewalk improvements and curb cuts until such time a building permit is issued. And that way you know exactly where the driveway is located, and then you generally do the pouring. I mean, last thing you want to do is put in a sidewalk and have a bunch of heavy trucks break it up. So you usually wait until after the home is built, you have some of the landscaping in, then you pour the sidewalk and you pour the apron.
I guess my question is, it says, they're not required of the developer at the time of development. Well, when would you do them if you didn't do them? What does the time of development mean?
Time of development is when you actually do the initial curbing, paving, sewer, water lines. In other words, before a building permit is issued, you have basically bare ground that has streets running through it with water and sewer and water lines underneath and whatever storm improvements are there. And you have curbs. And so you don't go ahead and cut the curb or put in sidewalks until you get a building permit.
So that's not development of the house, it's development of the subdivision.
Right. Right. That's, in fact, that's a good way of looking at it. That's not part of the development. When you get a building permit, you're paying for those, your sidewalk, et cetera. It's built to a city standard, but it's up to the owner to put in the sidewalk.
So maybe this will let me understand if I ask this question. What if they were required of the developer at the time of development? What's wrong with that picture?
Because there might be a possibility that they change the location of the driveway, they change the house plan. I've seen plans flipped as part of a building permit application. Confused me the heck at first. I'm going, wait a minute, you got the wrong plans. No, flip them. This is a mirror image. So, you know, when you're a builder, you have a little bit more flexibility. Otherwise, you're going to have to clean up the driveway, tear it all out, tear out the curb cut, put in a new curb, and then redo it again. So it's a matter of when is the most efficient, least cost, and logical time to go ahead and do it. And that's when you got your building permit. Besides, if you're starting to break up the curb when you have construction equipment there, it makes more sense to redo it at one time along with the driveway and sidewalks than it is to do it piecemeal.
We collect a sidewalk deposit at the time they pay their SDC fees with their building compliance application, and we hold that deposit until they install the sidewalk. So that's our way of ensuring that they do, after building the house, put the sidewalks in.
Something I'm not understanding. Do sometimes they put in a sidewalk and then come back and cut the curb later after they figure out where they want the driveway?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, now I get it.
Yeah, it just, otherwise, yeah, the last thing you want to do now, maybe the one time I think it would work out that way if the developer is also the builder. And the developer is going to build all the homes, knows exactly where the driveways are located, knows
Okay.
exactly where everything's going to be done. Then it might make some sense at that point. But if you're just a developer creating the subdivision, selling the lots,
Now I
unless
get
you
it.
have specific design standards, the builder usually has a little flexibility.
I just assumed, I didn't think that those are two different companies doing one and then the other. I kind of thought, well, they're all the same entity. Okay, now it makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, well, we can go one step further back, and there is a speculator who gets the zone change, who then sells it to the developer, who develops the plans, then develop it to a contractor to build the subdivision, and then sells the lots to the individual builders. So it can get, there's a lot of players here. Okay, I was basically pretty much done with that. I mean, there's a final review. Planning Commission looks at it and makes sure that it complies with the requirements. Everything that had to be done was done. And then they file the document with the county clerk and also give a copy to the city recorder. And that basically wraps up subdivisions. Now, I'd like to make a suggestion here because I'm making kind of a significant change with taking out the plan unit development and creating another section. Would it make sense to go ahead and stop here and look at the plan development before we proceed with partitions? Or, I mean, what's your call? I like to do this logically, but you know, whatever works for the planning commission.
I think that's fine to wait. It makes sense for me.
Okay, the other thing I'm going to do is that I'm taking all of the material that you requested I make modifications on back in May. I will also include that in the updated memo for next month, okay? So in other words, you will get the new section on plan developments and you'll see all the other changes going up to there. So we should be pretty much complete up to plan developments, and then we can dive in with the rest of the items. Because right now we do not have a land use case coming up. And honestly, partitions and property line adjustments are pretty straightforward. We're just gonna be looking more at street and access standards. So this will keep things clean and neat.
Great. I forgot to ask Sue, is that okay with you, Sue, if we hold off on going forward on petitions?
You're muted.
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
I don't think she-
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, we heard you. And then Jaden, I heard you were online. You wanna?
He's still online.
Yes, sir. That sounds good to me too.
All right. I just had a few more notes on this section before we get to 13650.
Okay,
I thought we were done.
Well, we haven't quite we've got another half a page here. We're at the bottom of page 12 and then we're a little bit at the top of page 13 left
okay.
before we get to partitions.
We're not gonna do partitions, I thought.
Right, we're not gonna it's before that. Walt called the game before I had thrown my last few pitches here, so I just wanted to.
Ken, I'm sorry. Ken, I will pick up the flag.
Let me let me just finish off here on before we get to that last part. Okay, in no case, in 11, we're talking about completion of improvements. And there'll be, and then at the bottom, in no case shall the bond exceed 5% of the remaining project improvements as determined by the city engineer. I don't understand, 5% seems like really low, why not 100%?
Okay, this is where, for completion of the project.
Most of it's done. It's the total, only 5% of the total, not 5% of what's left to be done.
Right, so in other words, if the estimate for construction was $2 million,
Yeah.
they can bond for no more than 100,000 of it. So in other words, what's called the punch list might be a couple of stop signs. It might be cleaning up some pipes or doing a few other minor things. This allows them to record the plat so they could start selling lots, while at the same time, there's enough money to cover the bonding for the improvements. So that's at the very, very end of the project.
Okay. I wonder if it would help me read this whole thing if you bolded the numbers that are in parentheses and underline the initial phrase when appropriate, like completion of improvements.
Okay, no, I generally do that. Didn't do it this time. I will do it. I think that's a very good point.
Okay, and in that
Yep.
same sentence there, all improvements required under this chapter shall be completed to city standards or assured through a performance bond or other instrument acceptable to the city attorney. Oh, get rid of that comma after city attorney.
Actually, you would probably add a comma after bond.
Okay, go ahead. I missed that one, but you're right. But after city attorney, it just didn't seem to need to be there.
Okay, there we go.
Yep, here we go.
I forgot the first comma.
Review. After F, on page review, I'm on I now. Final plat review of subdivisions and planned unit development. So we're gonna pull that apart.
Yes, exactly. Once you
Alright.
see P, yeah, I've already started crossing stuff out.
I'm gonna stop my question then on that one.
Okay,
And that's,
and
that I'm done.
okay, so the bottom line is basically everyone involved in the construction of the project, Public Works and city engineer, are assuring the planning commission that it was done according to the rule book, and that if you allow platting, subdivision is going to work the way it's supposed to work. People can build homes and connect to sewer and water, and also take care of storm drainage. So that's basically what that's about.
Okay. So we're not gonna read onward, we're not gonna do partitions, we're just gonna wait for you to give us a review, a renewed, a reviewed, a revised.
I'm thinking that might make a little sense because I want to make sure that we're on the same page with this. Also, we did, again, the first go around was back in May, and it's now what, September? And I want to make sure whatever changes I'm making and updating are consistent with what the planning commission wanted. So it's just a quick going over that, looking at the plan development stuff, then we can dive into partition and lot line adjustment.
Okay, great, give me a few days before, a week hopefully, for us to review. Your new stuff before the meeting.
Yeah, oh, definitely. You're going to get it a week before. In fact, I'll probably do a lot sooner than that because the next thing we're looking at is, updates. I know it's not on other business, but updates. DLCD has not made any determinations on transportation and growth management grant. So I don't know whether or not we will be awarded money for the TSP or not. So last I saw, according to their calendar, was end of the month.
That we'll find out.
Yeah, and then we'll find out. So I should have if I have news that we got it, believe me, I'm going to broadcast it to City Hall ASAP.
Okay.
Okay, one other item, next month, our regular scheduled meeting is October 21. I'm requesting a pass on that one. I got tickets to a concert, which my wife and I have been waiting a year for this group to come back to Portland. So I guess I'm begging an indulgence.
Depends on who it is, you gotta tell us.
Oh, okay. Gaelic Storm, they play Irish music. Did you see the movie Titanic?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, the Irish band that was playing,
Yeah.
that's them. They're fun.
They got that tune, the mournful tune of Titanic.
So do you want to move it then
Yes.
to another night?
Yes, that's why I'm requesting the 14th or 28th would definitely work for me. Whatever works.
14th, I'm out of town, 28th.
14th too, I'm out.
You're out on the 14th and you're good on the 28th?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, you know you got it right there, okay.
Yeah.
I'm good on
Ahead.
any day.
Good.
We can make it all work.
Sue, how are you on the 28th for planning commission?
I'll make it work. I've got company, but that's okay. He'll be here for a few days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jaden?
Yes, I'm
Okay,
available.
So I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, yes. Yes, you can.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Yes.
Okay, it's, shake your head. The volume's not real great. If, I don't know if it's just me and my computer or if it's the system, but anyway. So I see that there is, planning commission is taking applicants. Is somebody not gonna be here?
So there's two planning commission members that's terms are coming up at the end of the year, and that would be Ken and Sean. And I reached out to them and given them applications if they want to apply again, but just like when you and Lynn reapplied,
Okay.
we're putting it out for applications for everyone, and then the city council will go through those.
Wow, it's hard to believe we're already that far into the year, but we are. Okay,
All right, so we've already set the date for the next meeting to the 28th. And I think we can adjourn.
Okay. Oh, by the way, my wife thanks you.
I thought it was
Thank you. Have a great evening and wonderful week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
bye.